Good evening. Might need to... How do I follow that? Talking head after talking heads. Hello, everyone. I'm Joanne Heiler, founding director of the Broad Museum, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening's talk, part of our ongoing Unprivate Collection series of conversations between Broad Collection artists and cultural luminaries. Presented in conjunction with the Broad special exhibition, Keith Haring, Art is for Everybody, tonight's program features legendary dancer, choreographer, and Haring collaborator, Bill T. Jones. With Haring biographer, Brad Gooch. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Broad Museum, we opened in 2015, not even 10 years old yet, in downtown LA, with a mission to make contemporary art accessible to the widest possible audience. And since then, we've welcomed nearly 5 million visitors. Thank you. The opening of our Keith Haring show received a strong and positive response, both in media coverage and from the public. And I think that tells us how much Haring's life, activism, and art resonates today, just how timely it is, whether he was speaking in his art to LGBTQ rights, global abuses of power, or the HIV/AIDS pandemic. Art is for Everybody is the first ever museum exhibition of Haring's work held in Los Angeles, remarkably, and features 120 artworks in galleries pulsing with music from Haring's own mixtape collection. And speaking of music and art, our live programming throughout this coming summer will highlight the intersection of vibrant art, music, dance, and fashion in 1980s New York City, which, of course, Haring immersed himself in and which influences work deeply. I hope you'll join us for some of those upcoming programs. Here are just a couple of highlights. On June 20th, the Broad presents a conversation with Chuck D., co-founder of Public Enemy, Lori Bula, producer and president of Channel Zero Productions, Lisanne Basquiat, sister of Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Gil Vasquez, executive director of the Keith Haring Foundation. That's on June 20th. The event will be co-presented by the Broad and King Pleasure with the support of Universal Music Enterprises and PBS, and the documentary, Fight the Power, How Hip Hop Changed the World, will have free monthly screenings at the Broad starting this June 10th. Later this summer, doubling down a bit on this 80s vibe, we will collaborate with performer Ann Magnuson with 2 special evenings in July paying homage to Club 57. Then on August 26th, we will mark the 50th anniversary of hip hop with an evening featuring none other than the iconic DJ Grandmaster Flash. It's gonna be a good summer. Tierra Whack and more. I want to give a special thanks to our leading sponsor, East West Bank, for supporting our rich slate of public programs such as tonight and everything I just mentioned, as well as free family weekend workshops, our school programs that reach thousands of underserved students through our school group tours. For this evening's conversation, thanks are also due to the Robert Gore Rifkind Foundation for its additional support. Now for a very important logistical note, your ticket to tonight's program will provide you with free admission to the Keith Haring exhibition through Sunday, June 4th, this coming Sunday. You can just walk up any day, anytime, well, any open time, anytime we're open, show your mobile or physical ticket, and you will gain preferred entry, even if tickets are sold out on that day. So take advantage of that if you haven't seen the show. Now, a bit about our speakers, who I'm just a little excited to hear from, especially after that video. With Brad Gooch, Bill T. Jones will share recollections of his personal friendship with Keith Haring and their multiple collaborations, while Gooch will share from his deeply researched knowledge of the artist who rose to stardom at a young age and left a legacy of vibrant artwork and social activism when his life was cut short due to AIDS-related complications. Brad Gooch is a poet, novelist, and biographer. His book, Radiant, The Life and Line of Keith Haring, will be published by HarperCollins in March of '24. And we very much look forward to that, and you'll see why in just a few minutes. He's a prolific writer who's produced acclaimed biographies of Frank O'Hara, Flannery O'Connor, and 13th century Sufi mystic Rumi, 3 novels, a collection of stories, and a collection of poems. His work has been featured in numerous magazines, including The New Republic, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, and New York Magazine. Just a few things there. A Guggenheim Fellow in Biography. He has received a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship and a furthermore grant in publishing from the J.M. Kaplan Fund. Brad lives in New York City. It is safe to say that Bill T. Jones is one of the most beloved and revered artistic directors, choreographers, and performers of this century. Mr. Jones is the artistic director of New York Live Arts, an organization that strives to create a robust framework in support of the nation's dance and movement-based artists through new approaches to producing, presenting, and educating. His numerous honors include a MacArthur Genius Award, 2 Tony Awards, the Kennedy Center Honor, and the National Medal of Arts. He has created more than 140 works for his own dance company, as well as many commissions for theater, musicals, and opera. Bill T. Jones has devoted his career to expanding the parameters of dance. The 10th of 12 children born to migrant workers, Jones began exploring the possibilities of dance while in college, working in close collaboration with his late partner, Arnie Zane, before forming the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company in 1982. From the early 70s until Zane's death from AIDS in 1988, the 2 men created controversy and acclaim through choreography that incorporated politicized subject matter, such as homosexuality and racism, and multimedia elements. This poster documents Jones's 1982 collaboration with artist Keith Haring and photographer Sen Kwang Cho on a project merging body painting, dance, and photography. Mr. Jones and Arnie Zane were introduced to Keith Haring by Bill Katz and by a teacher of Haring's, James Carroll, in Keith's hometown of Kutztown, Pennsylvania. Following this introduction, Keith made 3 Sumi drawings for Jones, one of which was used as a poster for Bill's early work, Social Intercourse, Pilgrim's Progress, which was performed as part of New York City Center's experimental program by what would become known as Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane dancers and a large group of community artists. Tonight, we will hear about the friendship that emerged from this interaction, after which Jones collaborated with Haring on performances including Long Distance, in which Haring painted a large frieze-like scroll while Jones performed to the sound of his brushstrokes. And in 1983, Haring designed the decor and poster for the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company work Secret Pasture, performed at the Brooklyn Academy of Music's Opera House. This was a collaborative work that defined and set the bar for performing arts in the 80s. And the video you saw was filmed, actually, by Arnie Zane. Around this time, Haring also painted Jones's body at a London art gallery, resulting in some of the most iconic imagery of the era. Couple more notes before I leave the stage. If you have questions during the talk, please jot them down on the note cards you were given as you entered, and Broad staff will collect them after the conversation for some Q&A. And with that, it is my truly distinct honor to introduce and welcome to the stage Bill T. Jones and Brad Gooch.
Thank you. So, Bill, I have a request. We were just watching the in the back, you and I, the monitor of the painting of your body, which always puts me in a kind of trance, that footage. So if you could sort of take us back to where that was, how it happened. I mean, I have the biography facts. It was in a photography studio that Keith rented in London, in October '83. But if you could
Right.
fill in the rest.
Well, I'm not sure, we won't hop ahead, but
Yeah, you can have.
I think it's very important, even in answering this, that I have to disclose to you that this is very alive for me. This is an experiment. Can you talk about a friend, an artist, retrospectively, and you be retrospective as yourself? And what happens when you go in close, but you don't go in close as a person that you were, but this person you are? So Keith was, you know, all the cliches are there, radiant child. He was a hometown boy. He was all those things. He kept that boy-like quality until the very last time that I think I ever really saw him, and he was not well, and he was working feverishly. But there was still this look that he had when he held a paintbrush. Walking into his studio some years earlier, before this actual event that you just saw, we were always just dropping in. You could just drop in on Keith, and it was great. You never knew who was going to be there, and of course we were shy about how in awe we were of where he was going. So there was coffee table books and magazines. Oh, this one's from Sao Paulo, this is from Milan. And the one from Brazil had a gorgeous picture of a beautiful Brazilian soccer player standing in one of Keith's vases. But I'm only painted from here. And it was kind of beautiful. And he said, you know, I'd like to do you, but I'd like to do the whole thing. Right. Yeah, well, why not? We're down for it, you know. Because that was the attitude. We were free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. And free from what? Free from the ethos of the counterculture, which was supposedly non-self-promotion, non-making it in the big town. This place, LA, was hell, right? New York was a close second to hell, you know. But I don't need to tell you that if you yourself weren't there, then your parents were there. Because the real world was a place wherein we went back to the land and we ate natural foods and so on and so forth. We decried the war in Vietnam and so on. And then, but Keith was like out there completely in it, you know, and he was being photographed all over the world. So, yeah, and Bill, we're going to do this in London. You want to come? You want to do that? Oh, yeah, why not? You know, we were excited about it. Arnie and I had already been touring in London, maybe in the late 70s. I think the first time maybe was in 80, 81. When was this done again?
83, October 83.
So we had been doing tours there as a duet company. Keith was at has a show at the Robert Fraser Gallery, is how I remember it.
Yeah, that's.
And now you say he rented a photo studio, right?
Yeah.
But I think it was under Robert Fraser's.
It might have been, but I think he had this idea because he talked to you about it, and he showed you this Frigidaire magazine, it was called, that had a photograph of that, of the guy.
Frigidaire. Now, all evening you're going to find this is happening. This is an uncanny thing that happens, right? I've been telling certain stories for so long to myself and to others, and now you have a person whose job it is to have gone and checked the dates.
Right.
And, you know, and I hope that is a strength in the evening. I'm not at all protective about my memory, because as those of you who are Proustians in the audience know, and the memory is this a malleable thing. And
don't feel bad, because by the time I was finishing this book, I would start correcting Keith in my mind. Like, he'd be talking about what happened, and I'd be, no.
So anyways, as I said out front, it should have been Bill T. Jones with Brad Gooch talking about Keith Haring. So I hope when I talk to this man, I do learn things myself. So that's how it happened. I don't remember. Arnie Zane was there. You saw him with his Hasselblad. He was very proud of that camera. He had won a Creative Artist Public Service grant some years before. He'd gone from these smaller cameras, funky cameras. At one point, he owned the very camera that, an old camera that Avedon had owned, you know, that you could, on the resale market, and also, I think one of his cameras had been the camera that those iconic photos of Marilyn Monroe had been taken. So he was very interested in that, but then he upgraded to be able to afford a real state-of-the-art contemporary camera. I say that Arnie shot the video on this, right? Now, I see him in there taking photos. Was a video set up on a camera, on a tripod? I'm not sure. Huang Chi was moving around, doing this thing that he and Keith knew how to do. He was giving me instructions, flatten it out, you know. Because what I wanted to do was to carve space and circularity, and he was saying, you've got to make it legible, and it's about the painting. And as I was sitting here tonight and thinking that I heard that there's a number of dancers in the audience tonight, that you know that the tyranny of image. We were told in the early days, in my early days of the experimental dance, is you are not second to anybody. Your art form is its own narrative. You are your own story arc. Do not be allowed to, do not be decorated, and do not be decoration. Ta-da! You know, so,
But did you talk about that with Keith? I mean, did you have a plan, or did, what did body paint, what did you think it was going to look like?
Yeah. Well, you know, having been dropped acid at Woodstock and all of that, so I knew about body painting. And,
From the 60s.
You know, the hip, you know, the mescaline, somebody doing the hippie shake and so on. Yeah, so, and it was like kind of, it was uncool. It was uncool. But then I trusted this guy, and I had seen what he was doing with iconographies that came from other cultures and so on. So this is not going to be like a psychedelic trip. It's going to be, maybe that's my own, I wouldn't say pretension, but I thought of myself as an artist speaking a universal art language, and my body was yet another place that could happen. So it was not about an expression of the counterculture. Now, we spent a lot of time, and we'll spend a lot of time tonight talking about, I think I even heard in the direction that Arnie and I made works about homosexuality. What? who even says that? You know, like, no, you know, but homosexuality, we were gay. You know, you just did it. Right? We weren't. It wasn't a theme in the work. You know, it was, and respect. I mean, but that's how we have to use the language we use. But so Keith and I were just doing it.
But it seemed erotic. I mean, he also painted at the end on your penis three stripes, right? And
it's
so
funny, you know, and I've told that story. You know, you've got a good ear. Yeah, that last moment when everything is painted, and then he looks at me and he says, "Shall I?" I said, "Yeah, you sure." And 1, 2, 3, like that, you know, on the dick, you know. Dick's a funny word. Yes, right. Eve Ensler is now V, isn't she? Right? We were, it was, I have never really read George Bataille. I know a bit about it, but the erotics of what does he mean? You know what Bataille, this note about the erotics of thought, the erotics of objects, the erotics. So what we were doing was, there was an element of erotics, of the erotic, but we had a very gay men friendly conversation with Ed, and he and I, we were talking about Rene Ricard, who was he's a poet, very, a gossipy queen, yeah, and he, and who was talking about, I don't know what he was being provocative, you know, he had a big dick, you know, like Keith had a big dick, you know. Right. This says, I had no idea. There was no erotic charge between us at all, no sexual charge between us at all, you know, and so the whole event for me was. It was performance. It was dance. It was bearing witness, allowing him to bear witness. And we'll get there, but you think about what that means, first of all, to be naked with somebody. My companion is there. And incidentally, Arnie Zane died in 1988. I'm now married to Bjorn Ameland, who is my husband. But Arnie Zane was there, and he was witnessing everything. He was totally with it, you know, and therefore it was so safe. I mean, Keith used to invite me to, come on, the Paradise Garage, you know, like we'd take a little disco nap and we'll go to the club and dance at 3 o'clock in the morning and so on. That kind of the gay world, because we were modern dancers and we lived an hour north of the city, we didn't have that kind of world. And I know we were talking last night about the Bads. I never remember even encountering Keith at the St. Mark's Bads. And literally, everybody was there, you know, you saw
He was there, I mean, because he came to New York in '78, which was the golden age of promiscuity, and his original life was living in the West Village, going to baths and bars, and, you know, really completely embodying that life. But he especially liked baths, and part of it was that no one had clothes on, but not just the sexual part of that, but you couldn't tell what their social class was and what, you know, where people were coming from, and he liked that.
Oh, is that what it was? It was like the Catholic school and everyone wore the uniform.
Yeah, right.
Oh, how chaste, Brad. What a chaste image of the Bads.
But you were saying it was safe, but in this moment that we were talking about.
Yeah. But this event was, I felt so safe with him.
Right.
It was only, and you know we're going to get here, it was only when now I can't believe he didn't tell me this before, but I tell the story. He said, oh, by the way, the press is going to be coming. Yeah, so the press is going to be coming? And you know, I don't know if you all are experienced with the English tabloid press, but they talk about political correctness. They had no time for it, you know. So you got to imagine, this took 4 hours. It took 4 hours to do. So the top had begun to crack and dry by the time he was finishing the bottom. And the doors come open, and what are we going to do? I don't think we put any music on. This was all done later by, the edited film was done by Tom Bowes, who was a curator at the Kitchen, and he put the David Byrne on it. Yeah,
it works.
It does work very well. But what was I moving to? Kwang Chi was reminding me to make sure I flatten the shapes, make sure that it was camera, that imagine the camera and see things from the side. Maybe there was David Bailey, maybe there was Barushka in the famous Vogue shoot. You know the ones where she's turning herself into a spaghetti and making.
Also, I thought about Maasai warriors. I mean, I remember in the late 70s.
That's a wonderful connection.
No, but there were these. Everyone on their coffee table seemed to have these photograph books of Maasai warriors, and that's what.
The Maasai warriors or the Nuba?
Well,
both. Because the Nubas were these beautiful men who decorated themselves in wrestling and so on.
Right.
All of that was going on. Now, nobody called me on it at the moment. What kind of is this what you call a colonial gaze? You know, and that's G-A-Z-E, right?
Well, there was projection going on. I mean, Keith said that he thought you'd be turned into an African god, so there was.
So he did say that.
There was projection going on, or something, right?
But an African god, but in his mind, that was a wonderful and innocent thing. Now. Well, what right do you have? Now, this is Bill T. speaking now in our era to Bill and Keith in that era. What right do you have to impose that narrative of his ethnicity in your work that's going to be consumed by a white art world?
Right.
We didn't talk that way. You know, we didn't talk that way.
But you were thinking about it because you had certain rules that you.
Well,
down,
what you're referring to was when it was all shot, and Arnie had his photos, Kwang Chi had his photos, Keith was going places. He was, as you told me, 7,000. He made this poster.
Right.
Can we go back to number 3 again, please? That slide number 3, which is, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know, did he tell me he was going to do this? But I said, well, Keith, you know, you got to make sure that this is not just some anonymous black man. You know, this is choreographer, somewhere here, it says choreographer Bill T. Jones. Now, Brad regularly reminds me, you're already thinking about appropriation and so on. But I think more than anything was I didn't want to. Now here I get into trouble. I worked with Robert Mapplethorpe, but I didn't want to work with Robert Mapplethorpe the way that he was working with his Black Book. You all know the Black Book, the famous photo of the man in the polyester suit, black man, his zippers down with a jagunda and dick of the imagination falling out, right? You know, no, this is not what we're doing. We're doing, as I say, we're having an artistic, aesthetic expression, a conversation, and my body is extending your visual world, right? And as a matter of fact, in some ways, I would say I was doing it on behalf of the dance world. The dance world in the new art. We were going to be there, and we're going to be the body mechanics, the nakedness that Trisha Brown would have appreciated. All of that is going to be on display, but now we can own the fact that Bill's body is a black body, which is great contrast with these white lines, and that it was, we were bringing the skeletal understanding of what the body is. We were going to be the honesty of movement. It's going to be there for the whole world to see, and it's also going to talk about these two men, something that becomes more and more difficult for me, these two men, black and white, to say, truly free at last, we're free. And you're right, the homoerotic aspect was all there as well. And I just want Keith, make sure that you know that I'm not a model. I'm not just a model. Considering I'm sitting with a person who was a very successful model, no disrespect. But
not really. I was like a B model.
You were a B model? Okay. You were good looking, let's put it that way, right? So, that was very, was that the discourse asserting itself, or was it about my career, my positioning myself, which, as you know, was a tension at that time.
Right. Right.
Well,
both of you were trying to make it.
Yeah.
Which brings, you know, so I don't want to leave out, you know, your other kinds of collaborations you did and things like how did this happen in one moment? But one thing people want to know is how you originally got to know each other. And I mean, one thing that I can fill in is that, you know, you met Keith at a certain moment. Keith had been, he grew up in, most of you might know, but Kutztown, Pennsylvania, which was an all-white town when he was in high school. His father had been a Marine, and Keith was kind of a rebel with the cause always. I mean, he was in the art room all the time. Then he became a Jesus freak, and he was doing one-way, like, signs all over the streets of Kutztown. And then he became, which someone has already asked about, a Grateful Dead head, was traveling around with the Dead.
He traveled with them?
Well, he followed them in concerts and sold Grateful Dead t-shirts, the original Keith Haring t-shirts. He goes to Pittsburgh for a while with the girlfriend. He's living, he hasn't come out, and then comes to New York basically to come out, and goes to SVA and starts doing drawings on the subway. And this is where people started, I mean, I saw my first Keith Haring. It said, "Clones go home." And it was on the sidewalk between the West Village and the East Village. So this was like an inside gay joke. And then you would start seeing on the subways these drawings. And so the moment you met him was before, it was when people knew who he was, but didn't necessarily even know his name. It was called Chalk Man. Like they knew the guy who did the drawings on the subway or on the street, but they weren't signed.
Well, can we just, this is a fascinating narrative, and I'm learning things about
and it's
Keith
over,
as well.
but you know, like,
but, okay, so this could either burn your ass, or it could say, that was so beautiful. How could a white boy from Kutztown come in and appropriate the street style of black and brown boys?
Well, he was always, you know, interesting attitude. He was aware of it. So when he did the subway, this is the time you had wild style graffiti covering all the subways, right? and with, done with spray paint and things. And so what did Keith do? He went to the fallow ad posters, which are just black matte squares where no ads were up for a few weeks, with chalk, and would do these drawings. So they were fragile. They were going to disappear in a few weeks, and they weren't on the subway. He never did graffiti on the subway. He did this kind of art project
I know,
over
I got
here.
it.
So
I got it. That's what
yeah.
he did.
Yeah.
But what gave him the chutzpah to do it? And in other words, there's Keith, the radiant child that he was could be very disarming, right? Yeah. Imagine, can you join that society so easily? Mm-hmm. What cred do you have to be accepted into that society? Obviously, it said a lot about that group of those black and brown boys,
right?
And there were girls as well, right?
Yeah.
But they accepted him in, right? This was always something that we would sort of skirt. That he was, Keith, are you a member of this world, or are you a member of the high white art world?
Right.
And he never had to answer that.
No, and he did both tracks.
Yeah.
But also people spoke for him. I mean, so Fab Five Fred and different respected street artists were friends with Keith and took up Keith. And at Paradise Garage, which was, mainly black, brown, gay men club, gay club on Saturdays, because his lover was Juan DeBose, who was black guy, who was a DJ and was close to Larry Levan. He kind of spoke for him. So there were...
So Fab Five spoke for him.
Well, Juan DeBose at Paradise Garage, because he was close to Larry Levan and was a DJ. So Keith would be one of the 5 white guys that kind of belonged there. And he became like an artist in residence.
So this is it's great to talk to you, but this is an area that I hope that somebody minds. I do know that in the black community, what I know of the black community, I come from a family of potato pickers. We lived in upstate New York, born in the South. We were always a minority. And then when I went off to the university, there was, the black students had just taken over the student union at Cornell the year before. There was the Third World Corridor, it was a concession that the university gave. So nationalism, black nationalism, all of that, that was growing. There was a sense that America was forced to pay attention to what we now assume, do I dare use the word wokeness? It was, yeah, I know, it's weird how it happens, right? Something that originated in the black church has now gone through the political rinsing cycle, and now it's become this sort of line that it depends on how you use the word. So I use it in a way that I think it was at its highest. So there was this consciousness that I was just trying to get on board with, having been 19 at Woodstock, 17 at Woodstock, and we're not our bodies, and you can love anyone you want to, and the Grateful Dead and all, you see the pictures of a sea of young white shaggy people, and there'd be a black one there.
Right.
I was the black one, right? So,
right.
Yeah. No, so now, that is when I saw Keith, when I met him, I thought, oh well, he's like me,
Right.
Now, did I felt less comfortable in the black and brown urban culture than he seemed to have. And is the calling card when your companion is white? For me.
Yeah.
And did it work? You're trying to say it worked the same way because his companion was black.
Right.
And it isn't really true.
No.
No, it isn't true. No. Yeah, your dad, I need to school you all know who owns the house. The house is owned by white people. Yeah, but you might be having sex with the son, but it's owned by white people.
Right.
So those are the kind of uncomfortable conversations that thank God we didn't have.
I thought you had. You never talked. Keith had African American boyfriend Juan DeBose, Puerto Rican boyfriend Juan Rivera. Did you ever talk to him about that?
No. It was all moving so fast, and it was so easy, man, you know, like take another hit off this joint, and like, you know, it's fabulous, we're gonna do this, and it's gay, and it's about sex, and, you know, now people were having those conversations, but we were not having them in the 80s. I don't know what did Fab Five Freddy talk about having conversations?
No. But I mean, but you nicknamed him the Iceman at some point, Keith Haring. So you were having some
Well, that was me
sense of
seeing him as a man. I say that because we had a lovely tradition. It didn't go on for very long. Every New Year's, Arnie and I and he and Juan 1 or Juan 2, you know.
Yeah.
Now,
his two great loves were inconveniently both named Juan.
Yeah, so and which was very inconvenient. But we would be out on New Year's, and where I come from, at New Year's, the person, when you've got to find your loved one, that's the first kiss. You lock lips with that person, right? And here it is, you're Happy New Year, and we're all, and then, what was it? One of the ones was sitting there weeping, you know, and I'm like, "Kid, you know, go kiss your boy," you know. Oh man, you know, I don't know what he was. Something like, it's his trip. He's having a, you know, there were always these things that were unexpressed, and I said, you know, that's what I meant by I said that he was, he loved to hang out with hot people, but inside of him, really, there was a kind of, I mean, does this sound highly prejudicial? He was a wasp, right? And, you know?
Well, I think it seems surprisingly that he had a kind of detachment and then just like focus on his art. He was working all the time. And you can kind of confuse him with those exuberant dancing figures jumping all around, but that was in his work. And he could seem he could be a little
But it was really a hoop to see him like take on the accoutrement, what was it? It looked like he had gone to, you know, those tuxedo rent shops for your prom. And
that was the first party of life at Paradise Garage, right?
The canary yellow one?
Yeah.
And, you know, with the ruffled collar and all, and he was feeling bad, you know, like this, you know. Like, I mean, was it a joke, that what he was wearing? You know,
no, I don't think to him.
And that's
I mean, you said it was like a prom, like a
it was so uncool. But he was so uncool that he had to be cool, right?
How was his dancing? Do you...
Hey, what can I tell you?
I never asked
He expressed himself, you know. We're going down, so we're going uphill. You know, let's pull us out. We're in dive. Pull out. No.
Let's pull it up to
all that made it, you could do anything. I mean, isn't that the lineage of the Warhol? Warhol was kind of like the nerd who came to dinner. He was he succeeded because he was so uncool that he redefined cool.
And they really bonded. I mean,
yes, yeah.
Warhol was the real mentor and friend of Keith Haring. You know, they were both from Pennsylvania, both went to art school in Pittsburgh, both nerdy, and you know, infatuated with pop culture, and also very different. I mean, Andy was a total observer, and you know, Keith was engaged. I mean, he was engaged in political issues and activist art, and Andy was much less.
And you know, it's interesting that my friend was political in the way that I make homosexual dances, right? But you know, I don't think that was not part of our conversation.
What about collaborating with him? I mean, on these pieces at the kitchen and
well, I think I see what you're going, but like, what did we think he was making an assault on the art establishment? I think that, did he ever talk about it that way? I think that he was vulnerable to the sense that you could, you know Leslie Fieldler, you know, this critic from the 1950s who wrote shockingly about things like, you know, Walt Whitman, what was his famous line? Fags and blacks. You know, Walt Whitman was an example of fags and blacks in American letters. In other words, you know, these white men who are hanging out with brown-skinned men because of something, we unkindly call it jungle fever now, right? There was, now, in a way, that's a political stance. These are horrible, demeaning terms, but that's all part of what we're talking about here tonight, right? There was, so by him being with black and brown people, was that the first political statement? Now,
That was a political statement, and the gay thing was a political statement. I mean,
and they're not so separated.
no, especially for him.
Well, let's talk about Mr. Mapplethorpe.
That was very different.
Yeah, well, but what do you mean I have something called the Black Book? My little black book was what straight guys would, maybe in the times before. These are all the girls that I know I can call up when I'm horny and I can have sex, right?
Yeah.
And then he did something called the Black Book, which was all black men,
Right.
right? Now, when you call it the Black Book, who is the audience? The audience is not black men,
Right.
right?
And also, he was photographing stereotypes. I mean, especially, you know.
What? Stereotype?
no, Mapplethorpe doing the big dicks.
No, I know what you mean, but I was one of those guys.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. And
Whereas
the only
Keith
condition was that he could not show, and this was Arnie Zane, my white man, right?
Right.
My white Jewish man who knew how to do that thing. Yeah, you can photograph him, but, you know, we don't show his dick. You know? Now, that kind of modesty against what we've just shown here, it's strange, isn't it? But there was something disarming about Keith that was different than Mapplethorpe.
Right.
Mapplethorpe was trying to own his eroticism, but
Yeah,
at the same
but
time he was owning a lot of other messy shit as well.
I mean, Keith really wanted to be part of the community. He
The
wanted
community being...
I mean, he would go with LA2, someone he collaborated with. I mean, and have dinner at his mother's house. I mean, he was
So
always
he wanted
having...
to be a part of the black and brown community.
Yeah, and he was always having dinner at everyone's mother's house. You know, so, you know, he wanted to be. I mean, he said that. Right?
And he definitely, and we all had access to his family as well, which was very touching. That father with the buzz cut and all was, it was very, very touching to see that there was a real family feeling there.
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
So I mean, the conversation becomes murky now. Once again, I say, when I try to be where I am now and looking at what I was doing there, the language, it gets harsh. It gets, and like I say, free at last, free at last. Can I ever be that free again? You know? Do I want to be that free again? Right. Do you want to be that free again? Right? Yeah.
Well, it helped to be pre-AIDS and to be young. And there was many things came together. I mean, Keith Haring was really one decade. You're talking about the decade of the 80s, and things came together for this kind of liberation, and he was part of that. And then the opposite happened, where there was a plague and people were dying, and it became very serious and changed from color to black and white. He went through both of those, and for everyone it was a test of character, and it was a test of their art.
And one more time?
I said for everyone it was a test of character and a test of their art. I mean, Keith went through AIDS and then was making art about ACT UP, and going to meetings, and
that was inspiring.
And didn't stop working.
He never stopped working, and that was inspiring about him. When we were all facing the maw of fate and circumstance, and it looked dark, right? What he did know how to do was to keep making those marks, and he was being rewarded for it as well, you know.
Yeah.
Unlike, what does it mean to be like a modern dancer, living in a 6th floor walk-up and not having any money, and with the lesions on your body and what have you,
right.
And dragging yourself into a studio every day. It's different, you know. But no, he inspired me in that way, and here we have silence equals death. Now, I'm going to probably making. Let's save this one. Should we go to Us at the Kitchen?
Yeah, I did want to see Because we had some footage of you and Keith doing, that's a real collaboration.
This is what I was lying awake last night in fear about.
Right.
You know, I am really pissed at fate that, and as this very rich collector said to my friend Bill, when she insisted that she be the first to walk through all of the shows, no matter who it was, and she picked out certain works. Now, I don't know if she was listening, but she told him, well, I picked out Safe Sex and Sex Equals Death, right?
Yeah,
and she said, well, you know, that says it all, doesn't it? And I said, oh, shit. Is that it? You know? So, died of the wrong kind of sex. You lived fast, you died young, and in a way, let's face it, you had it coming. And now the mea culpa is that super rich people own this.
Right.
And it's now, the symbol of your life is that. And I'm still trying to work that out. But before we go here...
we're trying to put AIDS aside, as we were at the time.
Yeah, let's keep AIDS over there for a moment.
Right, as long as possible.
Yeah, let's go back to when we were both young and pretty and at the kitchen. This is a piece called Long Distance. It was part of a...
Why was it called Long Distance, Stephen?
Sounds cool, doesn't it?
Yeah,
you know?
I like it.
No,
the best answer.
Well, you know, yeah. Well, you see the structure of it.
All right.
So
can we see that?
We're going to listen to it and listen closely to the sound of his brush.
All right.
So the sound that you're hearing, the only thing that the performance was calling for was just the sound of his brush and my feet on the floor. But this was the old kitchen when it was at the corner of Wooster and Grant. It was on a very busy street corner, so that was all the sound that was coming in the window during the performance.
Did he paint your face for that?
No, that was my idea.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. That line on the floor, that line on my face, the distance between the back wall, I think that's all about. Had we done body painting yet at this point?
You had, yeah.
It's funny, so maybe I was recalling that as well.
Right.
Yeah. Now this was the body allowed to, with Keith's painting, offering myself as a canvas, offering my body as that wall there were certain rules that were determined by his line. But here, it was the dancer in space, my arms, my legs, the dancerly concerns, choreographic concerns of space, time, breathing. And yes, there's a gestural language that was, there's references to being a kid and my family in the migrant camp, in the jukebox, and the way men and women carried on in the, quote, black world. And all of these things, and with a little bit of a nod to Trisha Brown, a nod to Balanchine, maybe even Cunningham, definitely Mr. Ailey, all of those things which made me a postmodern choreographer, and the repetition, as Lucinda Childs had informed us about.
And Keith said he wanted to be Bob Rauschenberg to your Trisha Brown company.
That was a sweet thing.
Yeah, that was the generational thing in New York. You would want to come to New York to be Frank O'Hara, or to be, Jackson Pollock, or to be Bob Rauschenberg.
Well,
so you had all that.
And that moved me that he understood something about our forms. They don't make any money in this form, dance, right? And I think he knew that he would always have earning power that we did not. And the Rauschenberg, Trisha Brown thing was we all wanted a Rauschenberg in our life. I believe he was giving her a painting every year for her company. And Keith said, yeah, I'd like to do that for you. And of course he got sick. And things began to change. Yeah. So, talk to us. The AIDS hotline. Hello,
it's forcing itself on us, right? I mean, one thing, before we get to that, we can put this aside again. It's like, right. But it was interesting that you mentioned before, his activism was always associated with AIDS, now looking back in a way. But he was so involved so early on with Earth Day and with nuclear proliferation and with anti-apartheid and with anti-Reagan. So that he had a broad global.
Let's see. Could we try start with 15, 16, 17, and 18? This is the Keith that I fell in love with as well. Yeah. Here, the black giant, and he never talked to me about what it meant. It was, I put that together. Well, how do you interpret that? This is a black giant yoked by this snake, which is sometimes coming out of someone's crotch, a dick, and producing, is he eating a person or spitting a person
Well, he
out?
developed it on the subways, this thing where you had the big guy. At first it wasn't a black and white thing. It was just it's like a David Goliath thing. So you had the big guy, like monster size, who's being led around on a leash by a little guy. And then, usually by the last frame, there were sometimes 4 frames, then the little guy was getting squashed by the giant on the leash. So,
let's go
and that
forward then.
became
What's the
then an
next one?
apartheid thing.
Well, it became apartheid then.
Yeah.
Now, was that just convenient, that he was jumping on some sort of political bandwagon, or he was interpreting the David and Goliath story?
Well, you remember he had these images, and they were his vocabulary and his language, and then he would use them in different ways. So you'd have a barking dog or a radiant child, and then they would show up in different stories. So this was one of those, part of his vocabulary, and then it worked with the apartheid message.
What's the next one?
Yeah, that's when you have a numbered kind of.
And then there's this, is that the Christian thing? There was that glowing rod. You talked about him doing which I never knew that part of him at all, and I'm so glad I didn't. You said
The which part? The Jesus freak?
Yeah, Jesus freak, right? Yeah. And so that rod that's emanating a power and a light that.
He was a little more Godspell kind of Jesus freak, but he was like, he had long hair and
okay.
The hippie he wished he could have been, but he was 5 years late. I think because you were, that was the group you experienced Woodstock.
Yeah.
Right. So that was where kind of a lot of this came from.
So, but I thought there was something moral about that stick, that he was going to take on capitalism. He was going to that little figure. And what's
there's like a baton. Well,
it
it switched around. It could be a penis stick with radiant, and then with Christianity. I mean, he also used a cross for that, and the upside down cross. That's when he really wanted to attack the moral majority.
Attack his people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of messaging in this activist political way, and you were doing messaging, right? I mean, you're coming out.
What does it mean to be in this body and stand in front of a cool audience of white people and talk about just a story from your life?
Right.
It's political. He mentioned race. Well, hey, wait a minute, I'm talking about my life. Now, we're all woke now. We know that, black and brown people don't have to ask permission to insert their experience because it's now black experience is American experience. Gay experience is American experience. Trans experience is American experience. But at that time, it was, the avant-garde didn't know that it was white. It didn't know. And it didn't know that it was misogynistic. He took the Guerrilla Girls to teach that, So, you said just being who I was a provocation as a black man. And particularly if you insist on talking. Because, you're aestheticized easily. And we let you in because you're special and you're beautiful. But once you have ideas and you say it on stage, it is charged. And I was doing that from the beginning. So somebody just went ahead and did these.
These are really early, but I mean, this is these kind of anti-Reagan things, street art. I mean, coming out of Jenny Holzer and things. I mean, in terms of sending messages, he was sending messages about Reagan and the Pope, and people would rip these off. And again, in terms of positioning, he would tend to put them on the bottom of lampposts. So he was never competing. The lampposts at that time, would be covered with graffiti and things. And then Keith found this spot. He had an eye for the spot that wasn't used that you kind of had to look for, and it became his space.
And I love that about him, because I think I knew these works before I even knew the guy that was doing the chalk drawings and the
because they happened before.
Yeah, but they were around, and what was left of them was around. Right.
The tatters or something. Yeah.
So we've not sort of gone back in time. Have we done due diligence on Keith Haring as AIDS activist?
Well, no, and it developed. I think what's interesting is we see as in the show, the silence equals death, the way that he took these images that were around and put them in paintings and things. That made sense. But he was also really active. I mean, he was going to protests like the St. Patrick's Cathedral, AIDS actions. Peter Staley, who was treasurer of ACT UP at the time, told me that Keith, first, when they didn't have money for certain actions, Keith said, well, come by my studio. I have kind of a cash business at the moment. And Peter would cash, meaning, I think he was selling some paintings. I don't know, but he had to do with his work. And so Peter would go by, and Keith would go to like a knapsack in the corner and start taking out these $100 bills, and he would give him like $10,000 in cash, and Peter would walk to the Citibank, and deposit this. And he said that the ACT UP receipts in 1989, a third of them were covered by Keith Haring. So
Wow,
you know, he was
remarkable.
beneath the art and around the art. He
So,
was
and unless I'm playing loose and sometimes maybe cheaply with my love for him, but that when Arnie was ill, and Arnie was very, as you probably know, was very, very publicly ill. We were the first of any dance world formed. Though there were a couple of people that were whispered in the ballet world, but we were the ones that went on McNeil-Lehrer and talking about it. There was, I don't know that you all are this LA-based artist here, but John Byrne, for instance, was one of the first people I know that we said, oh, John Byrne has AIDS. John Byrne and Tim Miller were a team. But when Arnie got ill, I went to him and said, we don't have a restroom upstairs. And he, I think, what did he do? He just like, out of his pocket, took a roll of and gave me $3,200 to get the toilet and all, and to tile the room, And that was the way he was. And so it was on the personal level, and also he had a political consciousness. He was a member of, did he see that was, fighting AIDS was a human thing, or was it a gay resistance thing?
Well, I think it was both. But I talked to it was interesting, I talked to his doctor, and he was saying that a couple of things. When Keith would come in the waiting room, that it would sort of charge people. And he said it wasn't because he was a celebrity. It was that he had this energy. He had this kind of light that could light up a room in that way. But the other thing he said about him was he had a global way of thinking. So he would be, worried about AZT and what kind of treatments you could take, but he was sort of thinking about the entire community and what how to get medicine to people and do all that. So he saw it.
Well, he was an incredibly intelligent, expansive thinker.
So I've been asked also, if people have questions that they've filled out on a card, if you could pass them to one side or the other.
Brad's he's keeping us on the program here, right? This, I think Sarah, the wonderful curator at the Broad, was telling me that this image of devil sperm was older than AIDS.
Yeah, I know that it was in the Apocalypse series he did with William Burroughs. She said that it was even older, and I haven't.
So what is this about for a man who was in love with male sex and penises and all? What is this about the devils in the sperm?
Well, this was the AIDS vocabulary.
But I thought it was even before AIDS, though.
No, the ones that this piece was a late piece. It was one of he started doing these black and white paintings that remind me of the chalk drawings. And he was influenced by Frank Stella, and he was, was doing really important, great paintings. A lot of them are in the Broad Show in the last couple rooms.
I love those. They're very elegant.
And this is like someone carrying this egg on his back, and out of it is hatching
the devil's
this
sperm.
demon sperm, and that was always connected to AIDS, right? And he was also someone who believed in some of the more paranoid theories, maybe they were true, about the government, that this was an experiment that had been started by the CIA in Africa, and all those
powders were being sprinkled around the docks where gay men were hooking up.
Yeah, and Keith did not put them aside. He entertained those, and in the work also. So.
It's funny. We never spent. We hung out a lot. Like I say, New Year's, Grace Jones's dressing room, where she's putting on her makeup forever, and Eartha Kitt comes in, and Beverly Johnson and all, and we were oftentimes together and just hanging out, and I think that Arnie and I represented domesticity. This was like a stable gay relationship and all, and something that he wanted, but I don't know if he knew how to have it. But we never talked about. Did he feel he was assaulted? A lot of us didn't feel we had a right to feel wronged. Was it Susan Sontag, AIDS' metaphor? that there's certain illnesses that are guilty. For instance, in the 19th century, tuberculosis was a guilty disease. Cancer is a guilty disease, and AIDS was a guilty disease. So I was not at the ACT UP meetings. We were just busy trying all these different protocols and all, and living our little thing up in the suburbs and all. But I never knew how he felt personally about.
I think he went through some dark phases, you know, but by the end he came, when you were talking about being PWA, public person with AIDS, he came out in a big Rolling Stone interview, which he really didn't want to do because he knew the value of his work was going to go up, and he found that to be kind of ghoulish.
Ghoulish,
I mean, when it was publicly acknowledged that he was sick, and that's what happened. But he, you know, he had the positive Keith came through. It was sort of, what's the positive part of this sickness for him is that it helps him to like focus in his work on what was most important, right? And then when you're telling a story, eventually when you get to the last page or this story has to come together. And you know, he was aware of his work and coming, you know, getting to another level with his work. So that, you know, that he came to a kind of acceptance.
In a way, in those last and crucial months and days, we lost sight of each other. You know, let me see. So Keith died, when did Keith die?
1990?
Yeah, but what time?
February.
And Arnie had died in March of 1988, right? Willie Smith, who we worked with on Secret Pastors, had died the year before, or maybe the year before Arnie. So it was like this drum beat, boom, boom, boom. And I was scrambling to my company. Arnie was very ill. We had back taxes. We were in real deep shit. And so I was trying to keep all these things he gave us that were not signed. So that was a very kind of weird and humiliating moment. How do you, when a person is ill, and now we should make sure they're signed because they're going to devalue unless we can authenticate them. And I think there was concern that really reflected poorly on me, that we were trying to cash in on his demise, just what he felt, right? And it was us trying to survive as well. So this kind of wonderful collaboration that we had in friendship was put under stress because of kind of needs and lack.
I had one last thought question before we get to these, which is, did we ever think we'd be sitting here talking about Keith Haring across from a show at the Broad? I mean, it seems that he's now among us as an important artist and, you know, relevant. Why do you think this is happening?
Why? Whoever asked that question, I want you to now speak to yourself in 30 years. And have a conversation with yourself in 30 years. But let's talk about how nasty it had become. I thought it was actually in the New York, somebody wrote about the show where he was experimenting. It's all downhill for now.
Right, Spy Magazine.
Spy Magazine. Or who called him out? It's suffering from Buona syndrome.
Yeah, I think that was in Rolling Stone. You know, Robert Hughes was attacking him as like a Miami Vice character. Hilton Kramer, when he opened the pop shop, said, "Oh, good, he has a store. We don't have to deal with him as an artist anymore." You know, Robert Hughes, who said that Basquiat was the Eddie Murphy of the art world. I mean, this is what,
but, you know,
this was all of the
those
stuff
are old
that was
white
coming.
Men. You can always write them off, right? You can always say they don't know. But I think it was being said in the hip circles as well, right?
That's
and as
true.
I told you when you and I were being interviewed, there was an artist a really great artist, a woman artist, who said to me years and years later, "Oh, Keith, you know, he was a really great guy, but he wasn't a very good artist." Yeah, I mean, this is the way that the conversations were with your peoples, the
Right.
people that you come out of, and you want their approval. He was a really good guy, and you know what he did with the people of color and all of that. You know, it was really great. But let's face it, it's not really a really good artist. But you know, you see that show, and for me, a great compliment, which I know has a problem, is say some of those abstractions, those canvases, hold their own next to Paul Klee. You know,
Right.
yeah, and that's how I feel. And how did that happen? Time, they say.
Right.
Trust time. Trust time.
Right. Yeah, I talked to Ann Temkin, who's the main curator of painting at Museum of Modern Art, which would never show Keith Haring, and never bought any work of his during his lifetime, which really bothered him. And he said that I feel like I don't exist for them. And she was just saying at the time there were all these distinctions that would have made it, you know, almost impossible for an institution like that to look towards Keith Haring for acquisition. And they were this distinction between high art and low art, commercial art and fine art, serious art and humorous art, and all those have collapsed. And
Those distinctions.
Yeah, those distinctions have collapsed.
Yeah.
And,
So now, what is the message then for the young artists in the room? Fuck them, right? Yeah. All right, guys. Yeah. We're in a room full of badasses. We can say that, but it hurts, doesn't it? When things get written about, or your work is not really, you know, you should be in that show, or you should be invited here, but they're not letting you in there. So yeah, you say fuck them, but there is something. There's pain in it. And the only solution is what Keith found, which is just keep doing the work.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, a sibling question that came up from someone on the Broad staff says, what advice or wisdom do you have for artists today who are queer or trans, considering the backlash against us? In your opinion, how does the current cultural war differ from that of the 80s and 90s? You can answer that.
Don't get me started on it. You know, that's when you're supposed to jump up, like Bill T. Jones would have once, and you do a fierce dance. You know, that dance, you stop and you say, I'm standing is where I need to be. I'm right here. How did Maya Angelou used to say? All of y'all, be you Irish, be you Jewish, go on. You've been paid for. Now, what does that mean? Go on, you trans people. You've been paid for. Your elders came, they suffered for you. Stand up, and you do it for somebody else. Can you hear me? No, we're not doing Oprah. We're not doing Oprah. I'm trying to say, how do you answer that question? What did you say about character? About age was, you said it beautifully a while ago. It was,
that it was like the stress test of character and commitment to art. I mean,
stress tests of character and commitment.
Right.
This time that my trans brothers and sisters are going through right now, this is, let's see 30 years from now what you made of this moment, what we made. Arnie Zane and I, who dared on the night of the opening of Secret Pastures, him as a mad professor and me as the, quote, fabricated man, where the room is going wild, and we actually kiss, full on the lips. Full on the lips. Then one of the performer who I knew who was apprenticing at Merce Cunningham said, you know, I'll say it, you know, I respect you. David Vaughn, who was the archivist, said, you know, what are they in public? Why do they have to rub our noses in it? Now, this is a gay man talking about two younger gay men. What do you mean, rub our noses in it? You know? But so you get angry. But what do you do with that anger? I know. Open your heart. Or what? Clench your fist. You choose. I do both.
Good job. Here, this is for you. What is your number one passion, and what do you miss most about your friend Keith?
Number one passion? You know, aging, your world shrinks. You know, my life, the most important thing in my life right now is the enthusiasm of my husband. He is not cynical. He still has appetite. I, on the meantime, you know, that person you saw brazenly getting his ass painted like that, you know, all of that, the world, in some ways, wants to shrink. I don't want to be hurt. Y'all go on and fight the battles. I don't want to fight them right now. And then, you know, what are you doing about climate change? How are you dealing with that? Who's out in the street? Who's doing that work? And I say, you know, go on. But the spirit, one thing I miss in that era is I can do this. I personally can do this. Keith was a provocateur for me personally. We can do this and we can succeed. It was clear what success was. Now I miss a clear sense of what success is. Success is keeping on.
Right.
And eating what you want to eat. Oh, big deal. You know, that's a privilege. Moving. Mobility is a big thing in this world, you know. A good deal of the world. You ask Mr. Achille Mbembe, he talks about the necropolis, right? There are huge portions of the world's population that literally are shut down, held in for whatever reason. They can't move. I can. But you know what? I don't want to move. It's a big deal for me to get on the plane and fly to Los Angeles to talk to this wonderful man, right? Why would I want to do that? I have a lovely garden. Sit still, you know?
Right.
And read philosophy. I'm missing Hannah Arendt tomorrow, my Hannah Arendt reading session, because I'm flying back home. That's hard for me, you know? Now, do I want to make a masterpiece that's going to, like, knock your socks off, right? Yeah. I'm getting too clever by half here. Let's move on. Let's move on.
In a society that highlights individualism and often likes to use black bodies for the objectification or the sense of trend, what would you say is the challenge of today's authenticity in the art world?
Whoa.
I'm glad I'm just reading.
No, read it again. I mean, this is for the history books, right? Say it one more time.
In a society that highlights individualism and often likes to use black bodies for the objectification or the sense of trend, I like that. What would you say is the challenge of today's authenticity in the art world?
I don't think it's ever changed. We all know that we make a deal with the world. You know, women know this very well, right? You make a deal with the world. And then you got to understand how to, do you know what you really love? You know, can the people that we're talking about, those people of color, what motivates you really? And here, back to the question, whose child are you? Now, this is more controversial. My companion and I, we talk about this a lot. Where do you come from? Who are your people? What's your tradition? Do you have one? Do you want one? How do you heal yourself? I know, let's get rid of all boundaries and all, but I don't know about that. You know? What is the taste of the food that you come from? And do you remember what the tit was that you sucked on as a child? Right? Yeah. What are those things? What are you grounded? I promised somebody important to my life tonight I would have my feet on the ground and stand in my truth. Quote. Don't you love that language? Bill, get your feet on the ground and, you know, tonight when you're at Brad, stand in your truth. That's my answer to this question. Oh, and by the way, how's Miss Beyonce doing? The most powerful woman in the world right now. Now, who's doing the signifying with that body? And who's making money on it? Oh, what about Miss Oprah Winfrey? I know they're exceptional, right? But no, like the Buchton scoring doesn't work so much for me anymore. Black folks, black kids know that there is, if you got the right move, if you got the right agent, you can be Beyonce. And that's, is it, I know my young nephews who all want to be basketball players. They all want to be, it used to be Michael Jordan or whoever, name Stephen Curry, whatever your latest star right now. Yeah, I'm going to do that. And I said, well, for every one of those guys, there are like 10,000 who fail. But what do you want to do? What is success for you? And are you brave? Can you show your ass? I mean, you don't have to literally show it, but do you dare be vulnerable? Do you dare? And this is the artist in the room. You know what I'm talking about, right? Do you dare be bold? When everything is allowed, what do you dare do? Now, sleep on that, because I don't know the answer to it yet. But I do know that I have love, and I have the ability to love. And I also can taste when an idea is born. Do you have ideas? And are you a good guardian of the ideas, a nurturer of an idea?
And to sort of bring that around to Keith, I think that one of the reasons he's enduring is that he created his own language. I mean, he wasn't appropriating. He was like coming up with the barking dog and the Goliath and the David and the radiant baby and putting this language. And I think we feel that. I mean, that he dared to invent.
Well, I'm not
his
quite
own,
sure if he would say that it was.
thing.
I mean, he told me, and he said it to many people. He felt that his heroes were, and he wanted his work to be like his two heroes. One was Walt Disney, and the other was Andy Warhol.
Right.
You know, and what did he mean? I want to be a household word, he said. You know, now in America, where everything is for sale, and you make a better mousetrap and so on. That's a very American sentiment, right? Yeah. So I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure. I know that I have suffered with the criticism. Yes, but it's not original. Yeah, what do you mean it's not original? I say, okay, I'll give you that. It may not be original, but is it authentic? Is it authentic to me? Now, maybe that's what we're saying about Keith. There was something authentic in it.
Right. And so the feeling for him, I mean, he often talked about how he thought it was coming through him. And that, you know, the feeling for him and this continuous line that we see him doing is that it was the only way he could do that would be if it were authentic to him.
Yeah, I understand. You know, I told you about the dream he had. He told me we were hanging out. There was a couple of things I asked him. What do you want to be doing in 5 years? He looked at me like I said, what? He said, I want to be doing what I'm doing now. That was interesting to hear. And then he also said he had a dream that he was in a tiny little Volkswagen with some friends, and they were going through a primordial forest or jungle in a little car, and they were passing monumental structures. The way he described it, they looked like his works. And they were gigantic. And I asked him, were you afraid? He said, oh man, it was like nothing I can describe, you know? So something moving through him,
Right.
the ancients, humankind. Are you in touch with that? Are you in touch with it? Do you believe that something moves through you that connects you to everything that was before, and by extension, what's going forward? What's your faith? Keith seemed to have a faith.
Right.
And it was not only ambition, because ambition can be its own faith, but he did have a feeling that he was serving something.
Right. I think we're just going to stop there. Do you think so?